This is my second Elliott Map Then and Now video. My first video introduced the viewer to the idea of combining the Gettysburg Elliott burial map with satellite imagery. With this recording, I will present other areas of the Gettysburg battlefield, determining the approximate location of the burials using modern battlefield landmarks. Elliott not only noted the graves of thousands of dead, but in a few instances, made notation of specific graves. We will expand on a few of these individuals. Again, keep in mind we are imagining the Elliott map is accurate. As we have discussed in my first video, there are reasons to question its original source. The Gettysburg battlefield would be visited by newspaper reporters telling their readers of the horrific scenes they encountered. A reporter with the Buffalo Courier noted in their Wednesday, July 8, 1863 edition, "In one part of the field, in a space not more than 20 feet in circumference, in front of General Gibbon's division, I counted 7 dead rebels, 3 of whom were piled on top of each other. And close by, in a spot no more than 15 feet square, lay 15 graybacks stretched out in death. They were the adventurous spirits who, in the face of a horrific stream of canister, shell, and musketry, scaled the fence wall in their attempt upon our batteries." As discussed in my first video, the origin of the Elliott map may have been created within weeks following the battle. The Franklin Repository newspaper of Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, noted on August 5, 1863, "A map of the battlefield has been made, which shows the exact locality of every grave." This article would suggest that the graves of the dead from the battle had been found and documented in the summer of 1863. When Elliott created his map, he designated the burials of northern and southern dead, as well as the location of dead horses. These locations were identified by straightforward symbols. A crosshatch was a northern soldier's grave, a single line was a Confederate soldier's grave, and the location of dead horses were identified by a comma. However, we must question the origin of the map and its accuracy, and for this exercise, we're only imagining the Elliott map is accurate. Barlow's division of the 11th Corps would be engaged in the afternoon of July 1st with Confederate infantry by Major General Jubal Early's division. Suffering severe casualties and their line flanked, Barlow's division would eventually give way and retreat through the town to Cemetery Hill. In reviewing the position occupied by Barlow's division, the Elliott map notes many graves, for the most part northern dead. We can imagine these are casualties from Barlow's engagement defending the Knoll. It's also interesting there are many graves located west of the Carlisle Road. This is the approximate area where the 157th New York Infantry, nearly alone, would engage Dole's Georgia Brigade in fierce fighting. The 157th would report the loss of 307 men in killed, wounded, and captured. There is a small marker located along the Carlisle Road in the approximate location of this action. When Elliott created his map, he added several names indicating the graves of specific individuals. One of the most famous is a grave identified by Elliott as Lieutenant Winn, 4th Georgia. This is actually the grave of Lieutenant Colonel David Reed Evans Winn, who was commanding the 4th Georgia Infantry. Winn would be killed on the afternoon of July 1st when he received a fatal head wound. His remains would be buried on the David Blocker farm. Legend has it that a painting of Winn, hanging in his home, fell from the wall and was pierced by a chair. His wife Frances took this as a premonition of his death. After the war, the Blockers were approached about removing the remains of Winn and sending them to the family. The Blockers refused unless the Winn family agreed to pay $10. The colonel's family refused. Finally, in 1871, the colonel's remains were sent to the family for burial. Upon receiving the colonel's remains, the family discovered his gold teeth and gold plate were missing. Contacting the Blockers, who were in possession of the gold, the Winn family would negotiate on the return of the gold, agreeing on a price of $5. Today, Lieutenant Colonel Winn's remains rest in Savannah, Georgia's Laurel Grove Cemetery. The current Elliott map indicates a group of northern graves located northeast of Gettysburg's town circle. My guess is they may be the graves of northern soldiers that were part of Colonel Charles Custer's brigade. This brigade was positioned in such a way to slow down the southern push against the retreating 11th Corps. One major change is the original Harrisburg Road, intersecting today's Carlisle Road, was just north of the railroad station. Although there were a few buildings north of the railroad line, most of the current buildings were built post-battle. The north edge of town would have been near the current train station. One grave noted by Elliott is that of Sergeant Amos Humiston, who had served in the 154th New York Infantry, part of Charles Custer's brigade. Custer's brigade would take position in the open fields northeast of town to delay the advance of Harry Hayes' Louisianans, as well as Isaac Avery's brigade of North Carolinians. During this brief engagement, Sergeant Humiston would be mortally wounded. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Allen of the 154th New York would note, "We were scarcely in position when the enemy, who were advancing in vastly superior numbers in our front, commenced the attack. We held the enemy in check, but their line of battle, being much longer than ours, soon came to our right flank and joined in a heavy fire. We were compelled to cut our way through. In doing so, our losses were heavy." The body of Sergeant Humiston was found approximately 1/5 of a mile from where he was most likely wounded. The often told story of Humiston holding the image of his 3 children is today marked by a memorial depicting the sergeant with his 3 children. A question we must ask is, how did Elliott know the location of Humiston's body when he created his map in 1864? By this time, Humiston had been buried in the New York section in the National Cemetery. With the collapse of both the 1st and 11th Corps on the afternoon of July 1st, Major General Winfield Scott Hancock, with the help of Major General Oliver Otis Howard, would regain order of a battered army on Cemetery Hill. The Elliott map indicates lunettes and breastworks constructed by Northern troops on East Cemetery Hill. These were occupied by both Northern artillery and infantry regiments. The Elliott map indicates the graves of both Northern and Southern dead. The Southern dead are buried near Northern artillery lunettes and breastworks now located on today's East Cemetery Hill. These are most likely Confederate dead from their assault on the evening of July 2nd. Louisianans of Hayes Brigade and North Carolinians of Avery's Brigade would attack and briefly overrun these northern positions. The graves of Northern soldiers appear in various locations and may be the result of losses suffered on any of the 3 days of fighting at Gettysburg. Elliott, as noted prior, had named the graves of various individuals. Why he did this is pure speculation. Elliott noted the grave of First Sergeant John Pierce of Company C, 25th Ohio Infantry, located just east of the entrance to the National Cemetery. Records indicate that on July 3rd, Pierce, on hearing the cries of a wounded companion, would cross over earthworks to try and save him. While making this righteous attempt to liberate his wounded friend, Pierce would be mortally wounded. He now lies in the National Cemetery in Section E of the Ohio plot. Another notable grave is that of B.W. Lee. Major Benjamin Watkins Lee was serving as adjutant in General Edward Johnston's division during the Gettysburg campaign. On the late morning of July 3rd, as the Confederate assault on Culp's Hill was grinding to a halt, many Southerners were seen surrendering. Lee, observing this act, would spur his horse forward in an attempt to continue the attack. Lee and his horse would be killed in this heroic action. In the report of Colonel Creighton of the 7th Ohio, he noted, "At the time the white flag was raised, a mounted rebel officer was seen to come forward and endeavor to stop the surrender, when he was fired upon by my men and instantly killed." Initially buried at Gettysburg, Lee's remains would be buried on April 23, 1866, in Richmond, Virginia. The Elliott map, as we have shown, note hundreds of northern and southern graves. Keep in mind, most of the graves of the Confederate dead were still lying on the battlefield or near hospital areas when his map was created. The number of burials located near the center of the July 2nd and 3rd Confederate attacks are staggering. The vast amount along the Emmitsburg Road appears to be Confederate dead. The map indicates Reb General Barksdale killed. This location is west of Plum Run. This incorrect note refers to Brigadier General William Barksdale, who was mortally wounded on the afternoon of July 2nd in the general area noted by Elliott. Barksdale will be taken to the Joseph Hummaball farm, dying on the morning of July 3rd. Another Georgian killed on July 2nd was the colonel of the 22nd Georgia Infantry, Joseph Wasden. Elliott noted Wasden's grave buried near the Cadore farm. As part of Brigadier General Ambrose Wright's brigade, Wasden would be killed during the brigade's July 2nd late afternoon attack on the northern line. Following the battle, Wasden's body would be found and identified by a Masonic certificate bearing his name found in his pocket. Colonel Joseph Wasden's remains rest in Savannah, Georgia's Laurel Grove Cemetery, near another Georgian, Lieutenant Colonel David Reed Evans, Winn. In doing a little research, I found the details of the removal of Colonel Wasden's remains to Savannah. A Gettysburg Times article dated Saturday, October 27, 1984, included the retelling of a story by historian and author William Storick that had first appeared in the Gettysburg Compiler's July 24, 1926 edition. It seems like a letter written by Dr. Rufus Weaver, who was responsible for the removal of the Confederate dead, was sent to Dr. John W. C. O'Neill, who had documented many of the burials on the battlefield, discussing the removal of Wasden's remains. Dr. Weaver details in his letter the findings of Wasden's remains. He indicated Wasden's remains were located on the east side of the Emmitsburg Road, just inside the fence, and was near the south end of the Cadore barn. Weaver continued, "I exhumed the remains of Colonel W. and packed them in a large box, number 5, in company with those of 8 other Georgians whose names were known as their graves had been marked. The remains were not packed separately in small boxes, but collectively in large box, by direction of Savannah's Memorial Association." What I found interesting is that Dr. Weaver also noted Colonel W.'s bones are in box number 5 with the bones of 8 other comrades, and among which are the bones of Lieutenant Colonel D.R.E. Winn, 4th Georgia. If you remember, Lieutenant Colonel Winn's remains were originally buried at the David Blocker farm north of town. Seems the Savannah Memorial Association was looking to combine remains in order, as was noted, to meet the limited capacity of the soldiers' lot in the Savannah, Georgia's Laurel Grove Cemetery. It makes one wonder if the story of the Winn family asking for the remains of the lieutenant colonel and upon receiving them finding his gold bridge missing is accurate. Combining the Elliott map with modern satellite images has been both interesting and challenging. The scale of the Elliott map is not accurate to today's satellite images of the battlefield. This has required me to rotate some views and stretch others. However, these overlays now provide the viewer with landmarks such as roads, monuments, as well as other features to approximate the location of where the battlefield graves had been located. These overlays should remind us that this is indeed hallowed ground.